Well, welcome. I believe we're live, and we're going to give people a few minutes to get on here. We're just going to give people just a few minutes just to connect with us, and then we'll get started. All right. All right, well, I think we'll get started. And what I'd like to do is just welcome everyone this afternoon to our Community Connections webinar. This is the fourth in a series that we've been doing, and the topic has been called Listening to Our Communities and Building Bridges. And so really we've taken the last 3 weeks to just listen to stories, from our communities in our area, to just hear what people have been experiencing around the issue of racism. And we've had so many compelling stories, and just the comments and just from all of you that have been listening, how it's impacted you. And I know it's had a great impact on us. And so we've just, we've been really glad that we could do this and offer this to our partner communities. So today, what we're doing is we're going to hear from 4 panelists, and we're going to hear how they're engaging their communities in these conversations. So we're taking it from personal listening to what communities are actually doing to hear the stories and to have the conversations in their communities. So I just want to mention as well, if you have missed any of the previous webinars, you can go online, go to communitygiving.org/communityconnections, and you can see actually all of the webinars that we've had over the last weeks. And so we welcome you to take a look at those previous webinars. Also, as you're watching today, if you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A box. And so we encourage you, if you have questions throughout the next 45 minutes, to just post any questions you have, and then Sarah Carlson will be facilitating that at the end. So about the last 15 minutes or so, we'll focus on Q&A and having the panelists answer your questions. So with that, I am going to pass this on to Sarah, who is going to introduce our first panelist, Pablo. So Sarah, do you want to take it?
Thank you, Holly. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Carlson with the Wilmer Area Community Foundation, and it is my privilege to be able to introduce a personal friend of mine who's going to share some expertise with you all today. This is Pablo Obregon. He is currently serving as the Community Engagement Officer for the Southwest Initiative Foundation, and he manages their community outreach, research and engagement, and intergenerational leadership and grow our own initiatives. He has attended Lutheran Bible Institute in California, receiving his master's in divinity from Luther Seminary in St. Paul, and then spent several years in the ministry in the Wilmer Lakes area. Most recently, he served as the Ready Reentry Navigator for Pact for Families in Wilmer, which supported youth in transitioning back to their community following criminal offenses. Pablo was born and raised in Lima, Peru, where his parents gave him a great education and encouraged him to try lots of activities. He loves Southwest Minnesota and has called Wilmer home since 1992. And it's a mix of residents and newcomers, and he firmly believes this is a great place to raise a family. Outside of work, Pablo enjoys time with his family, plays a fair amount of pickleball, and cooks Peruvian food with a strong cup of coffee. He's a volunteer coach with the Wilmer Soccer Association, volunteers in the Wilmer Cinco de Mayo celebration, and is a member and leader inside our Wilmer Lakes Area Vision 2040 Steering Committee, particularly around the issue of inclusion and engagement. So please join me in welcoming Pablo Obregon.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and thanks everybody for the opportunity to share with you a few thoughts about how to continue to build bridges with our new immigrants and those who are on the outskirts of our community sometimes as newcomers. I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully I find the right, yep, and then here. Okay, so can you see the slides?
We can.
Great. Thank you. So again, Pablo Obregon, I'm with the Southwest Initiative Foundation. And actually this month, in a couple of days, I will be celebrating my coming to the United States. I arrived in 1986 in August. And look at that, now we're in 2020 and I'm still here. And I came only for 2 years to continue my education, and I'm still trying to live, but I can't. So how does your community look like? Maybe it still looks a little bit like this. Walmart nowadays looks more like this. We have a lot of diverse people, and the city of Walmart has been a community that has welcomed several hundreds and now thousands of new immigrants to make their homes here. And we have a lot of experiences. We have a lot of learning yet to do, but I'm very proud of being a resident in this community. There is a lot of opportunities that have been created for everyone, and not everybody has been able to take advantage of those opportunities for many reasons. I have been able to hold on to the opportunities that this community have given me, and I'm very proud to call myself a Walmartite. I also coach soccer and for the high school, and it is a great opportunity to be an ambassador to this community. So the city of Walmart, with about 20,000 people, have been in the works of how do we welcome new immigrants in our community. And I think the answer has been by engaging with the local and with the new immigrants. We have about 7,000 people from other countries that have made Walmart our home. And several of us have been investing our time and our energies in participating in this, the community life. So the first thing I would like to say is that how to build bridges is give us a space in the decision tables of your communities. And by me saying communities, I mean city committees, work, task force or committees, whatever you're representing today, whatever you call your community, give us the space. I think it's important to have a voice and a presence of the new immigrants to feel that our voices and our communities are being welcome in a legitimate way. I know it takes time to develop leaders and to build trust, but don't give up. I think it's important. And as my friend Sarah has said lately, and I keep echoing her words, is keep things simple. Don't try to find ways to make big things and big projects. Those are important. I think big things and systemic change is necessary. But I think if we could somehow find ways to keep things simple, we will be able to do a lot of great things together. Another way to engage with this issue of building bridges is by listening, being able to develop relationships, personal relationships, both with young and elderly, and listen to their stories. You know, we all have a story. And sometimes by us sharing our story with one another, we could celebrate our heritage, our traditions, and bring our cultures together and make a stronger community. Another way to develop those bridges is by organizing ourselves and networks. My voice is just one voice. And if Sarah wasn't here, and Ken Warner, and others in the city, probably our voices will be just a whisper. And I invite you to organize yourselves, create networks, create groups where you can put your voices together, and remember that many voices also means voices with power. So that would be another example of what Wilmar is doing. We have created several spaces in this community where we can exchange ideas, try to solve some problems, and find ways to address the issues that our community in general are exploring. The Southwest Initiative Foundation has empowered me to work with our region as a community engagement officer, and I'm celebrating those networks that we are creating. In Wilmar, we have a specific mission called Vision 2040, which is an organization that has come out as a community organization. Leaders from several sectors are coming together, and recently a committee has been formed to specifically talk about how do we stop being racist, and how can we make our community an anti-racist community. Even though we are at the beginning of the journey, I think it's an important committee to work as we are making soundboards for each other to share our stories. Another example of networking and working together is the Wilmar Area Community Foundation has given a space to Southwest Initiative Foundation, myself representing them, the United Way, another way to sit together along with other partners and find ways to give grants, to channel those grants, to answer the specific needs of our community. Again, another way to show partnership in our community. And finally, I want to say that all these partnerships and networking is important because you need to find specific ways to show your solidarity with those who are not privileged and those who are living as new immigrants in your community. And one specific way is to be part of the census. I think the census is a very visual and powerful way to show the presence for everybody. We have a large invisible community. Help us out to make them visible by encouraging everyone to be part of the census. I look forward to your questions at the end of our conversation and panels. And again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Pablo. This is Carol Turno, Central Minnesota Community Foundation's Executive Director, and I have the pleasure of introducing Jennifer Erickson. She is the Director of Customized Training at St. Cloud Technical and Community College. They have a new program that's going to be rolled out this fall that people are invited to attend called Anti-Racism Dialogue Study Circle. So she's going to tell a little bit about that and some other opportunities in St. Cloud as well. So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Carol. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit more about what we have going on at SCTCC, as well as share a little bit more about other resources and conversations happening in the St. Cloud area. So if you want to change to the next slide. Yeah, so SCTCC, for those who aren't familiar, we are obviously a technical and community college. We have about 4,000 students on our St. Cloud campus, and they largely come from the 6-county region, the Great River area. And that's Stearns, Benton, Sherburne, Wright, Morrison, and Mille Lacs counties. And of course, we are seeing a growing diversity in our student body because that reflects the larger diversity in this region. So right now we're, want to say around a quarter of our student body are students of color. So we have a college-wide commitment to equity, which really is part of the larger commitment to equity that the Minnesota state system has. I think many of you are familiar with our former name, MnSCU. So we're part of the MnSCU system. If you want to move to the next slide. This is really the commitment within the Minnesota state system. So by 2030, we, together with our partners, want to eliminate the equity gaps at every state college and university. And Minnesota State is really looking to do that through a variety of methods, really looking at enhanced access, by strengthening partnerships and collaboration with K through 12, with business and industry, and with community-based organizations so that we can grow our programming and find other ways to support students. We're also working on student academic success so that students who enter actually move through and complete their program of study. Looking at student engagement and support within the institution, both academic as well as the growing needs for supporting basic needs of students, housing insecurity, food insecurity. And then other areas are data-guided decision-making, making sure that students have the right financial resources and support, and then of course supporting workforce diversity, both within the institutions themselves, but also how we help to support our communities in increasing diversity in the workforce. If you move to the next slide. So this fall, one of the ways that we're trying to engage the community and really further the conversation around race, as Carol mentioned, is our Anti-Racism Study Dialogue Circle. And this is a program which will be a 10-week program with, which will be held via Zoom. And it's really sort of a graduate level training aimed around conversations on race and privilege and how to address systemic racism within organizations. And this, we're really hoping to engage a variety of community leaders, leaders in healthcare and education and business to be part of this conversation. And then we're also looking to offer organization-specific training. So as companies and organizations want to have these conversations within their workplace, we are offering the opportunity to support that through skilled facilitators. So if you go to the next slide. So that's what we're doing within SCTCC, but I wanted to mention some of the larger conversations happening throughout St. Cloud. So of course, another sister university within the Minnesota state system is St. Cloud State University, and they have been engaged in this conversation around race for a number of years, especially through their CARE initiative. Where they hold a variety of workshops for students and employees, and they also do facilitator training for members of the community so that they can engage in conversations around anti-racism. They have another organization called RPAC, which is more focused on how to introduce anti-racism and issues of race and privilege into teaching, so for professors and graduate student teachers. Next slide. Because of the issues that have arisen in St. Cloud over the years, there has another group that's come together to talk about racism is Create Community. And this is a group of an informal group of leaders who have come together consistently for around the last 15 years. This was started by the former mayor and has continued under the current mayor. And they come together, again, focused on ways to promote diversity and understanding among residents of St. Cloud. And then the Jew God Leadership Program, I'm sure many of you are familiar with them as well. They have had an effort to place leaders of color on boards and commissions, working with business leaders to diversify their workforce, again, especially in the areas of management and leadership. And they've recently started a video series around dismantling of cultural myths in healthcare and in other areas, which they have posted on their website. Other community resources include the St. Cloud NAACP. Next slide. Unite Cloud is an organization that is doing a lot around education and empathy, trying to help engage people from a variety of different backgrounds to build a greater sense of community, shared sense of community, and lessen fear. And of course, other resources and leaders in the community for these conversations include area churches, as well as Catholic charities, the library system in the region, and local business and civic organizations. And I would say that while we would love to have you all participate in the conversations that we're having at SCTCC, I would also encourage you to look to the organizations that you belong to, whether that's a local business organization or a civic organization. We understand the importance of this conversation to our students, understanding that they're the future workforce. So if you're belonging to organizations that aren't having this conversation, then that may be another place to start as well. So if you'd like to learn more about what we have going on, I have my contact information here, and I would love to engage with you after this. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Jennifer. And now it is my honor to introduce our next panelist, and her name is Joani Nielson. And Joani's an entrepreneur. She was one of the founding partners of Tastefully Simple in Alexandria, and along with having grown other businesses as well. She's currently the president of the board of directors of the Alexandria Area Economic Development Commission, and she does a lot of mentoring with businesses. One of the things she started and is spearheading is an initiative happening in Alexandria called Time for Change. And so I'm going to turn it over to Joani, and she's going to share with you what's happening with that initiative in Alexandria. So Joani, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Holly. Let me share here with you. So as Holly said, I have been in Alexandria for a while, and entrepreneurial spirit is definitely alive in me, and my passion for people in our community is alive as well. After the George Floyd incident, I think many people across the country saw that there was a time for change. And so an initiative was literally put together in 5 days. In 5 days, this group of women said, yes, it's time for change and we need to do something. And within 5 days, we pulled together not only over 400 people, we had the mayor, we had the captain of the police department, we had a pastor, we had a representative from Black Lives Matter, and also we had Black citizens who shared their stories of injustice that were happening in our community. Of course, our goal is to have a community in which all people feel cared for, included, respected, and supported. And when that isn't happening, we felt we needed to do something and to do something different. One of the things that's made this initiative so successful in our mind is the fact that we are running independent and we have no affiliation. It is not a political organization. It is not defined by Christian or non-Christian, pro-police, anti-police. There's really no affiliation other than all who support equality are invited to participate. So I'm going to share a video which recaps the event, and I think the video can actually share more than my words. So if you have to adjust your volume a wee bit to hear it, you may have to do that. But I'd like to launch the video here for you to spend a couple minutes watching.
Please, 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 I can't breathe. I think it's real interesting that we're sitting here on the grounds that once was Jefferson High School, because it's here that all sorts of young people, they form their ideas, their opinions, and yes, they form some of their biases as well.
Alexandria is a beautiful place, a wonderful place, but we can always do better, and we need to do better.
We've got to feel it before we can fix it. And the problem is, when it comes to racial injustice, we grew up in communities, in churches that didn't teach us how to feel the weight of injustice.
I will listen to understand and be at the table to hear. So many times law enforcement comes to the table to be heard. It's time that we listen.
Before you are 526 roses. They represent the final 526 seconds of George Floyd's life. Please pause, reflect, feel this moment.
Being a Black woman in a white homogenous community, I am never not aware of my Blackness.
It has not been easy being a Black woman and learning about racism while experiencing it. Learning about things like slavery, but the thought in my head that racism took place 400 years ago when it exists in our community to this day.
The exhaustion that I felt from engaging in this fight isn't even a fraction of the exhaustion that people of color in this community must feel.
Frankly, to be Black in America is exhausting. We don't have the privilege of not seeing color because the world rarely misses an opportunity to remind us that our white counterparts do.
I'm sorry if this comes across a little bit harsh,
But I want to know if you're going to be there tomorrow. Don't let this be the only thing that you show up for.
All lives cannot matter if Black lives don't matter.
I still get teary-eyed every time I watch that, so sorry about that. So that was a very powerful event, and I think, Pablo, you had said it, you keep it simple. What do you, what's next? What do you do after that? It can't be one moment in time. Kevin Taylor, who you saw in the video, he also spoke here, I believe it was it last week or the week before, as part of the Bridges as well, and he's part of our team. But really the next step now is taking this to what we're calling conversations that matter. And the who behind this is really 6 groups. One is a vision team of community leaders that are really looking at where are the inequities, where is the injustice, how do we move forward as a community, and how do we move forward not only today, tomorrow, in 5 years, and 10 years. We also know it's important to have the community liaisons be part of bringing the message to our community. We have a program design team that's really looking at how do we impact people throughout our conversations. Panel guests who are devoting their time to share their stories, sharing their experiences. And I'm not sure if Holly, you mentioned this, but we are 97% Caucasian in Alexandria. That's 3% all others. Right now we are focused on Black. We will be talking about, color and Native Americans at some point, but we are really leaping off of the George Floyd injustice because it gave us the platform to start having the critical conversations. To have a vision team that includes not only the city attorney, our chief medical officer, the superintendent who has just retired from the school district, our captain of the police force, someone who is, Vicky, who is part of one of our biggest manufacturing companies here, Kelly, who employs probably the most diverse group in Alexandria. So to have a visionary team that says we are bought in and we need to make a change, I think has been really critical to what we're doing. We've been able to engage many people from outside of Alexandria who have expertise with not only being Black, biracial, but also adult education and cultural change. I still run into people, as I'm sure Holly does, in Alexandria, that don't believe inequalities exist in Alexandria, that discrimination does not exist in Alexandria. And what I find is typically it's because a person has not engaged with somebody that's not like them. Because if you have someone that's not like you as a friend or in your friend's circle, you know it does exist and we need to do something about it. Part of that is also engaging people that can share their stories, share what it's like to live in Alexandria. I just want to point out that John Lewis, who's on the far left here, he's a young gentleman that I have been mentoring since the age of 17. He's now 28, has a 4-year-old daughter. And for me to hear him over, a 10-year period, share the stories and his experiences have been absolutely heart-wrenching. And so I do know it's time for us to change as a community. I have a very good friend from Atlanta who, when she was in Atlanta, she was voted one of the top 10 most influential women in Atlanta. In Alexandria, Minnesota, she was asked to leave stores. That has to change, and people need to hear the stories. And it needs to happen one conversation at a time. So actually our pilot event is tomorrow, August 5th, and it is called Conversations That Matter. Calvary Lutheran Church is actually hosting it with their board of directors as well as their staff. The program is a 90-minute program. And what we do is we ask leaders to host the event. So in this case, Pastor Hans Dahl is hosting it as our pilot group. If it were Kelly Jansen and Henry's Foods, she would host it and she would be considered the organization leader. We ask that no more than 20 people participate at any given time. We are setting it up on Zoom sessions rather than live panel so that we can keep moving in the world of COVID. And really the 90 minutes is about not only setting the stage to let people know that discrimination does exist in Alexandria, to share experiences and to have conversations with our guest panels. As far as time for change, we have provided a pledge that we will ask people to sign. I know you can't see the details on this, but this is really about self-reflection. We want individual members in that group of 20 to really commit to what can they do, what are they going to choose to do differently, not only personally, but in their home, in their neighborhood, as they interact with people that are not like them. The Calvary logo is only on here because they're a pilot. Obviously, if it went into Alamere Health, that would be their logo, or Henry's Foods. So personalizing the pledge for the organization. And then we're providing at all times on our website the top resources that are out there. We're not creating the resources. We really serve as the spark for the conversations. So being able to put, what are those top videos or books or podcasts? Again, we see that evolving over time. We also want to make sure that it's interactive. So let's say Holly decides that, you know what, I read a book, I thought it was wonderful, and it's not on your list, that she can actually post that information and share it with others so that we're all learning together. And then the big thing is at the end of the session, after the panels have shared their experiences, the leader comes in and talks about what are we as a small group of, like I said, no more than 20 people, what are we planning on doing? Do we plan to learn individually and commit to reading a book or listening to a podcast? Are we going to actually have a roundtable conversation and have a book study? Are we gonna decide to be advocates for an initiative? But ultimately, it's about transforming people's hearts and minds to look at things differently and to be brave enough to have the conversations. Our ongoing support, our website, so if you go out here, it is not up yet. It will be up hopefully tomorrow at 4 o'clock before our pilot. And again, out there will be a place where people can either donate, learn more, or sign up to be part of the program. So that's what we're doing in Alexandria, and that's what I am spearheading at this point. My passion, again, is around people. And I've been blessed to be surrounded my whole life with diversity. It's not happening in Alexandria where I find that diversity. And yet I know that it needs to. If we're gonna be a growing, healthy, thriving community that embraces people, we need to start having these conversations. So again, it sounds pretty simple. You know, why wouldn't you be having these conversations? And we also know that we can facilitate the conversations for people maybe that don't know somebody that's not like them.
Thank you so much, Joani. That was insightful to think about, almost a to-do list of how a community could get after curating conversations. So we're going to move on to our next panelist, who is Paula Chapulis. Paula is the owner of Ayana Consulting, and she also has more than 28 years of experience with both for-profit and not-for-profit organizations, as well as owning 3 businesses. She has multi-industry and multicultural leadership experience and has worked pretty diligently to bridge gaps in an array of areas that includes cultural, healthcare, community values, leadership development, and even international relations. She has pretty deftly navigated high emotionally charged organizational differences, public relations issues, conflict resolution among boards, strategic planning, and financial sustainability. Paula values relationships, and she is a connector. And in her capacity working with people across many walks of life, she maintains a very calm and grounded center that allows her to connect on a deeper level in her role as a leadership coach. She is also consulting with the Brainerd Lakes Area Chamber of Commerce in her role as the director of the Blue Ox Business Academy. Paula, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks so much for asking me to be a part of this panel. I loved hearing each and every one of you talk about what's going on. And what's interesting for me is that my husband and I moved to the Brainerd Lakes area only 3 years ago, a little bit over 3 years ago. And our 2 daughters joined us, of course, in the move. But what I want to talk about today is a little bit about my background in working with different cultures, and also the community that we moved from and the work that I had done there to help build bridges. And so the community we moved from was Worthington, Minnesota. It's in southwest Minnesota, about 50 miles from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and 15 miles from the Iowa border. And I lived there for about 15 years, and my husband Brad was there for about 18 years. And we moved here for a career move for him. But prior to that, I was living in St. Paul, and when I met him, I didn't even, I'm embarrassed to say, I didn't even know where Worthington was located. And so I had to look it up on a map, but anyway, so I was working for the St. Paul Port Authority at that time, and part of my role was to connect manufacturers to resources for them to grow or expand. And I also worked on special projects, and one of those special projects was working with the Hmong community to help them find space for a funeral home. And for them, they cannot have more than 1 funeral in a building at a time because they believe their souls will intermingle and they'll end up with maybe the wrong ancestors. And so their funerals also last about a week to 10 days, maybe longer. And so there was a lot of backup. And so I worked with them. One of the places that I've learned over the years where you can really connect with someone that's different than yourself is to understand their spirituality and how they grew up, what makes them believe what they believe. And so it was really interesting working with the Hmong community to do that. And we did find them a space. And then I also worked with a Somali community there. So this was mid-90s, mid to late 90s, and the Somali community was growing was starting to work for manufacturers, and there were some miscommunication, some difficulty in just expectations of both from the manufacturer side and the Somali side. So we worked to pull together leaders from the Somali community and the manufacturers to really come together to talk about, you know, what is it like to work for a manufacturer, and what are the expectations? And what is it like for a manufacturer to be truly welcoming, and not just welcoming, but how do you help someone feel like they belong at work? And so those conversations happen quite a bit. And I love that Joani said that it all starts with conversations that matter. And that's been my experience all along as well. And the interesting thing for me, I've been immersed in cultures since I was pretty little. I remember in the 1970s, my parents hosted refugees from Vietnam and then African farmers from Tanzania and Kenya. And I studied German in high school, was an exchange student in Germany. And that was another experience, I think, that sort of shaped what it was like for me to be in a place that I didn't really know the language very well. I didn't know the culture all that well. But what a learning experience that was. So fast forward, I ended up marrying my husband and moving to Worthington. And a little bit about Worthington. Like Wilmer, I was relating quite a bit, Pablo, to what you shared about Wilmer. Worthington is the third most diverse city in the state of Minnesota, next to Minneapolis and St. Paul. There's 60 plus nationalities in Worthington and 30 plus languages spoken in the schools. And the percentage of the Latinx or Latina and Latino community residing in Worthington is the highest per capita in Minnesota at 35.2%. So there's also African refugees from Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, Nigeria, Asian refugees, Vietnamese, Karen people from Burma, and Laotian as well. And my role there before we moved was as parish administrator for a pretty large, diverse Catholic church. We had about 1,200 families, and we also had a school, K through 6. And most of the, I would say more than half of those families were immigrant families, or are still immigrant families there. And most of those are Spanish speaking. And in 2010, St. Mary's got a new pastor who is a missionary priest who spent time in Liberia, in Los Angeles, was there for the Rodney King, the uprising after all of that, was head of the African Resettlement Program in Boston, and really the right person for that job in this community. And so I learned a lot from him. One of the first things he did when he arrived is he sat down with the immigrant community and said, "What is your greatest need?" And just listened. And again, there's that listening thing, right? I mean, just really listened. And overwhelmingly, their response was medical care, that they were using the emergency room as really their primary care. And so because of that, he called his friend, Dr. Dave Plevak at Mayo, and said, "Hey, Dave, can you come over and see a few of my parishioners who are in need of medical care?" And so Dave came with his doctor bag from Mayo and saw 20 patients that first weekend in May of 2011. And when he was done, he said, "In my 35, 40 years of medicine, I've never, ever seen anything like this. And I'm coming back, and I'm bringing friends." And as you can imagine, it grew like crazy and became Our Lady of Guadalupe Free Clinic. And so it started as a mission out of the church. I was a board member, and someone had referred, I think Pablo, you had referred to making sure that on boards or in leadership positions that the voice of the community is heard. And for a while, the board of the clinic did not include an immigrant, and that was a mistake on our part. And within probably by 2014, 2015, we made changes to that and made sure that both the advisory board and the executive board were made up of immigrants and patients so that their voice was heard. And not only heard, but to make sure that we as white or Anglo people in the community, weren't doing all the talking. We would ask questions and be quiet and listen. And the clinic director of Our Lady Guadalupe Free Clinic is an immigrant herself. And the reason I bring this up, after we moved, so I was on the board of the clinic. After we moved, I was asked to be executive director, and I worked remotely. And one of the things that I really wanted to make sure is that we were providing leadership opportunities for our clinic director, who is an immigrant. So that's the other piece I think that was really critical, is advocating for that as well, and making sure that I would just get out of the way and listen. And so that sort of sets the stage a little bit for what the community was like, what some needs are, and what was done. And in order to, as you can imagine, this has been decades. I think the community started changing in Worthington in maybe the early 80s, mid 80s. And there have been lots and lots of strife throughout the years, lots of conversation, lots of different things. But there's a couple things I wanted to share with you today that were really beneficial and that worked really well. And the first one is sort of kind of an obvious thing, but there's a group called Manos Unidos, meaning hands together, that started the International Festival. And it was celebratory, and it has grown like crazy. And now the schools incorporate that as well. So they have international festivals within the schools. And in fact, my daughters say that that's one of the things they miss a lot about being in Worthington. And so just celebrating the cultures and celebrating some of that was really critical. And then it also provides a learning opportunity. The other thing as a parish that we did was to host retreats for women. And what we decided to do was start with women and gather women together. And our hope was that the seeds of friendship would start. And the retreats were never about immigration. It was always about, relationship, your spiritual relationship, your role as a mother, your role as a woman, things like that. And we found that the women really started bonding, and that built a great foundation for more work. And so after that, we also put together a task force of all the local community organizations that did any kind of work with people from other countries, with our new immigrants, with our immigrants that have been there for a while, and with any poverty as well within the community. And from that, we decided to host a public information forum. We actually did it in the parish, in the church itself, because it held so many people. And we invited community leaders, regional leaders, area leaders to come and listen. Again, there's that word, listen. Right? So we wanted our immigrants to come, and not just the immigrants, but anyone. It was open to anyone who wanted to share what it was like living in Worthington. And our chief of police was there, reps and senators were there, people from the city, from the county, other church leaders, healthcare leaders, things like that. And so it was hours long, and people shared their stories, and it was really moving. And from that, there was 5 or 6 of us in the community that started a program called Faces of Worthington. It's since changed its name to United at the Table. But basically, what we decided to do was that, again, those conversations that matter, the one-on-one relationships, getting to know each other and connecting at a human level was really important for us. And we knew that that would make a difference. And so we invited friends of ours that we thought were open to hearing an immigrant story. And we invited immigrant friends of ours as well, and our friends who are immigrants. And then we made a meal together. We made sure we were all around one table. And we started off by introducing ourselves and our heritage. And unless you are Indigenous, all of us come from another place, whether that was by choice or not by choice. And so we shared that, and then we started talking about some myths around immigration. And those of us that were familiar and did some education around this would share, you know, what the myths were, what the truth actually was, and did some education around the topic of immigration. And then after dinner, we moved to the living room for a living room area, and the immigrant shared their story. And we asked, and this was hard because there was a vulnerability to sharing the story. And we asked them to share what they experienced in their home country, their home community, what was going on that made them choose to leave their home country to take this incredibly dangerous trek to come here in the hopes of a better life. And one of the memories I have that was really profound for me was an older gentleman, a farmer, was a guest that evening. And this immigrant had shared his story about his children and the violence in the community, and that he had already had a couple children who were killed by gangs. And this older guy was just sitting there really, really quiet. And one of us asked him, you know, what's going on? What are you thinking? And he just sat really stoically. And I thought, oh no, what's going on? But he started having tears that just flowed down his face. And he said, you know, I think I would have made the same decision if I was faced with the same realities. And we realized that this was a really powerful way to bring people together, to share their stories. And hundreds of people now have been united at the table, and it's been really successful. So I know this wasn't about the Brainerd Lakes area. I know Carl had asked me to share a little bit about what we did in Worthington. I know that there are some activities happening here as well. Region 5 does a diversity inventory here. There's a Welcoming Communities Committee. Myself, there's a organization that wants to support some classes around what and how to work with businesses to be more welcoming, so that we're looking at that through the chamber. So I know there's more to come. And so thanks a lot for having me here.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your insights and your stories and the thoughts that you have. To kick off our questions and answers this afternoon, I'm going to circle back to something that Pablo mentioned earlier in his presentation, which is about the census. And we have an important opportunity in front of us right now in every community to ensure that all of our residents, our neighbors, are equally counted in the census. And so Pablo leads that work in Candy, Ojai County for the Wilmer Area Community Foundation and the Vision 2040 initiative. And so I asked if Pablo would share just a little bit for all of you to be thinking about how you can support the work of the census. Pablo?
Yes, thank you. Can you imagine if hospitals, schools, city offices, county offices, police department, fire departments start sending or firing some people because of budget cuts in their communities, in your communities? That could be one of the results if we don't have absolutely the majority of people be counted in each of our communities. That is how important it is. It is important that also we keep our seats in the representation in the Congress for our regions. So we want to make sure that everybody is somehow participating in the last 2-3 months that we still have. There has been an extension to the census. It's not going to and at the end of August. Now we are looking into October, the end of October, which reminds me, there is a push at the federal level to change again that final date from October 31st to September 31st. So if you want to write your senator or congressman tell them that we need to continue with the extension until October 31st so that everybody can be counted. Please, I ask you to do that. Again, if we don't do things hands-on, we'll just be talking and talking without any action. So this is one specific way to make sure that especially our minority communities are represented in our census this time.
Thank you, Pablo. The next question that's coming through in the chat is really to Joani. And Joani, one of the themes is, first of all, are you willing to share some resources about the work that you're doing? But if you'd make a comment also about how you were able to get the leadership team to get this Time for Change movement ready to go in 5 days. Like, how did that happen?
Okay. First of all, for the resources, I know a couple people have private messaged me as well. And because we have our pilot program tomorrow, we're going to allow them to look at it one more time before we finalize some of the documents, including the pledge. But if you could look by the end of the week, all of that information, including our top resource list, should be available on our website. So including the pledge will be out there as well. So that's our goal and that's what we're targeting. As far as pulling the event together in 5 days, many people have asked me that, and I realized that it didn't take 5 days, it took 30 years. And being in this community for 30 years, people knowing my heart, me having built relationships with people that trust me, they knew that I wasn't going to hang them out to dry. You know, when you have Black Lives Matter and law enforcement together at a time when there's turmoil in the country, that could easily be something that people wonder, is this a pro-cop, is this an anti-cop? I think it came from 30 years of trust and being in the community, for one. I also think I have the relationships in which I was able to reach out to people and say, you know, is this something you support? Can we pull this off? And I do believe I hit a time where many people were asking themselves, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I was able to launch a program in which I could give them a very specific action to do, which was to show up at the event, learn more, hear more, and now the next step, participate in those conversations, host a group of people, and let's keep the learning going. Again, I've had people ask if we could come and have our program for 200 people. That's not the goal. The goal is to have 20 people and having it be kind of like the round table or sitting around with a small intimate group. Is those relationships have to be built, those conversations have to be had in a safe environment in which people can not only hear and listen, but they can also ask questions. So, you know, there's 10,000 people plus in Alexandria. This isn't going to be a check done in a month. This is a long-term commitment. When I'm 90 years old in Alexandria, I don't want to hear that one of my friends was asked to leave a store.
Thank you, Joani. I have one more question, and this one is to Jennifer. Jennifer, one of the things that many of our communities have in common is that we are hosts to colleges, community colleges, state-level colleges, and universities. And many of the students about to return to our communities are people of color. So what advice or feedback or thoughts can you share with our participants today about setting an intention to make our communities more welcoming to these students and people of color who call our communities home for a short time?
Yeah, I think this is an area where St. Cloud really, the Downtown Council really took a strong approach in everything from simply putting out signs to welcome college students, letting them know that they're welcome, and getting the word out through that way. I think engaging with the colleges would be key. Finding out, are there opportunities to host students? Are there opportunities to participate in conversations with students? finding other ways to be part of that conversation. I think that a lot of organizations look for opportunities to bring college students to their programs. And I would certainly encourage that and encourage ways to specifically reach out to students of color and invite them to programming that normally students might not even know exists or think about, and really making that intentional effort to have them come and represent their college at a program either once in a while or on a regular basis, and really start to form some of those bridges between the college students and the community, whether it's, again, organizations or businesses.
Great. I think with that, we will, it's almost 3 o'clock, so I just want to thank everyone for participating today. Three things are coming to me as we think about bridging. It really starts with relationships, and the listening is still so important. So we've learned so much over the last, well, this is our 4th webinar, and just from a community perspective, just what all of you are doing. It was good to hear your stories and get into your worlds a little bit and how you're making a difference in your communities. So thank you so much. And thank you for all who attended and listened. And you can see some resources there as well. And just another something we want you to know, we're going to be taking a little 2-week break from the webinars. We're in the process of, in the design phase, figuring out where our next webinars are going to lead. So go ahead and go back and watch some of the previous, and watch for emails and information coming from us on future webinars. We will plan to continue down the road a few weeks. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you for having me.